I trusted her for 15 years. I gave her everything, my love, my loyalty, my heart, but nothing could have prepared me for that moment. I received a picture on my phone, and there it was, my wife, wrapped in his arms, smiling at 30,000 feet. She thought I wouldn't find out, but she was wrong. I could feel the world around me shift as the weight of betrayal settled into my chest. They think I'll just stay quiet, that I'll forgive and forget. No. I've planned something far worse than that. He's rich, powerful, untouchable, or so he thinks. But she doesn't know it yet. I'm going to dismantle everything she's built. My revenge is already in motion. It's time for them to pay. Come on, Bobby, I heard the loud woman say, her voice grating against my nerves. It's time to move on. She's back with you, and she won't betray your trust again. You've been together for 15 years and have 2 wonderful kids. Do you really want to throw all of that away? If you split up, she'll have your boys, and you both could struggle financially. Getting back together is the best choice for your family. I was torn between the words of this irritating woman and the dark thoughts swirling in my mind. Did she not understand? I couldn't decide what was worse, her relentless optimism or the idea of forgiving my wife for being unfaithful. This wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment after a night out, it felt much bigger than that. There had to be consequences for her actions. The problem was, if I acted on my feelings, I would end up hurting myself more than anyone else. I had more to lose than she did, and this loud woman certainly wasn't helping my mood or my ability to think clearly. So, there I was, Bobby Smith, sitting on a pontoon boat in a lake with her, the loud woman, her annoying husband, and my unfaithful wife, all from Kansas. I glanced at the shore, a daunting 300 yards away, and knew that swimming there was out of the question for me. But in 10 minutes, I planned to show my wife just how deep my feelings ran in a way she would never forget. To give you a little background about myself, the guy caught in the middle of this mess, I grew up in Wichita, Kansas, which proudly calls itself the air capital of the world. Major companies like Boeing, Cessna, and Spirit have factories there. In school, I did okay, but my parents rarely paid attention to me. My mom had her struggles and didn't always act appropriately, while my dad thought he had married well when they got together. My older brother and sister shared the same father as me, but they couldn't take the constant fighting and calls for help from neighbors. They left the moment they graduated high school, wishing me luck in quickly moving on, worried they might get dragged into something serious. My teachers always said I was smart enough to do well, but I never felt hopeful about my future. At least I managed to wait until the morning after graduation to leave home. My first stop was the U.S. Army Recruiting Center. Since I excelled in my shop classes, I signed up to be a wheeled vehicle mechanic. It was one of the first times I felt like something good was finally coming my way. To many, the pay for an Army private seemed small, but to me, it felt like a fortune. My platoon sergeant appreciated my work ethic because I did my job well and got along with everyone. We went out together, had fun, and enjoyed our time for 2 years. When my time in the Army was over, I wanted to return to Wichita and work at one of the aircraft plants. I enrolled in training at the National Center for Aviation Training to gain the skills I needed for better jobs. I focused on aerospace manufacturing and technology, believing it was the right path for me. I was thrilled when Cessna offered me a job. However, 6 months later, while helping a friend build a shop in his garage, I had an accident that changed everything. At first, I was upset and blamed my friend for his mistake. While we were working on the roof, a piece of metal blew off, slicing deep into my chest and leaving me bleeding quite a bit. Seeing the blood, I shouted for help, then chuckled at the irony, I wasn't in the Army anymore. My friend pressed a shop rag against the cut to stop the bleeding, and we rushed to get medical help. There was a clinic just a mile away, so he drove me there. Although I wasn't in danger, I was making quite a mess, so they quickly ushered me into a treatment room, not for my safety but to keep the waiting area clean. What happened next changed my life forever. The most incredible nurse I'd ever seen walked into my room. She was tall, strong, with dark hair that cascaded to her shoulders, and her smile lit up the entire space. Her name tag read Nurse Ann. She glanced at my jeans, work boots, and stained t-shirt, then smiled at me. "I didn't know they were having auditions for a show today," she joked. I replied, "I'm not sure about that. I was busy building a home for kids and finding cures for illnesses. My injury happened when some metal blew off the roof thanks to a celebration by some smart folks." She chuckled, "It's only 10:30. How early did you start drinking today?" "Not at all yet," I replied, smirking. "But that depends on how long it takes you to help me. After all, if you want to drink all day, you should start early." She looked at my medical chart and said, "You smoke cigarettes, too, don't you?" "Yep," I answered. "You remind me a lot of my brother," she said quietly. "Do you care about your brother?" I asked, intrigued. She sighed. "Yes, but sometimes it's hard. So there's hope for me to take you out since I'm so much like your brother?" I teased. Her response was a laugh. "Ha! Please take off your shirt. I have more important things to do than talk with someone like you." It was tough to pull the shirt off my sore shoulder, so she cut it off instead, playfully shaking the scissors as if teasing me. Without a word, she started cleaning the blood and dirt off my chest. I'm 6 feet tall and mostly muscle, which seemed to make her spend a little extra time tending to my injury, her touch surprisingly gentle. As she worked, we exchanged banter, and I felt a connection that I hadn't experienced in a long time. In that moment, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and the warmth of her presence, my focus shifted. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to rebuild my life. But little did I know that my current storm was only the beginning. Now, as I sat on that pontoon boat, I was torn between past and future. I didn't know how I'd confront my wife when the time came, but I knew it wouldn't be gentle. Whatever awaited me on that shore, I could feel it calling my name, urging me to make a choice, one that could change everything. Nurse Ann took her time caring for my wound, and I couldn't help but flinch at the sting of the antiseptic she poured over it. I half expected her to gently warn me that it might hurt a bit, but she just chuckled. After finishing up, she walked to the door, turned, and pointed at the exam table I was sitting on. "Stay here for just a moment," she instructed firmly, but her smile betrayed her playful demeanor. A few minutes later, Nurse Ann returned with the doctor. I could see the tension in her posture, her nerves evident that I might act up and make things awkward. If I wanted to connect with her, I had to be a better patient. I straightened my back and answered their questions with yes, sir and no, sir, trying to be as polite and agreeable as possible. As the doctor examined my wound, I caught Ann's eye and winked. She responded with a smile that warmed me more than the antiseptic. The doctor instructed Ann to prepare a syringe to help with the pain while he got ready to stitch me up. I couldn't help but steal glances at Ann as she focused intently on the doctor, sometimes glancing back at me and smiling before returning her attention to her task. After the doctor finished stitching me up, he looked at me with a serious expression. "No heavy activity for a while. Keep the wound clean, and make an appointment in a week for Ann to remove the stitches." "Great. I'm looking forward to seeing Ann again," I replied, a grin spreading across my face. The doctor chuckled, and Ann blushed slightly, which made me happy. With a grin, the doctor said, "We need to clean this room in 3 minutes. Can I count on you two to wrap up whatever you need to do within that time?" "Yes, sir," I said, and Ann smiled but didn't respond. I took a deep breath and turned to her, my heart racing a little. "What time can I take you out for dinner tonight?" I asked, a hopeful smile on my face. She paused for so long that I thought she might not answer. Finally, she said, 7 o'clock. A curious expression crossed her face as she asked, "Red pickup?" "Yep," I replied with a nod. "Figures," she said, walking out of the room with a playful grin. After our encounter, I went home to tidy myself and my pickup for the evening. I opted for clean jeans, a fresh cotton shirt, and nice leather shoes. I wanted to look presentable without overdoing it. I figured and might be surprised if I showed up in something too fancy. Our outfits were similar, but she looked better in her fitted jeans, there was no doubt about that. And knew how to climb into a big truck gracefully, especially at 5 feet 7 inches. Once we broke the initial silence, conversation flowed easily for the rest of the evening. We exchanged stories about our lives, and I learned that she came from a small town in southwest Kansas, a place I had never heard of before. Her family ran a farm and ranch there. I had hardly traveled outside the city, so I could only imagine what life must have been like in a small town. By the time we left the cozy Mexican restaurant, the sun had set, and the streets were illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights. I asked her if she had ever seen the Keeper of the Plains statue by the rivers. When she shook her head, I knew I had to show her. I drove her to where the Big and Little Arkansas rivers converge in Wichita. At that spot, an artist named Black Bear Boson had created a stunning 44-foot-tall statue called the Keeper of the Plains. The area was known for being a historic meeting place for various Native American tribes, and in the late 1800s, trail drivers would rest longhorns there before sending them off to Chicago. I learned about this during my visits to Wichita's Cow Town, which showcased life back in those days. The statue looked magnificent at night, beautifully lit against the dark sky, while the bridge over the rivers resembled a bow and arrow. Although Anne had lived in Wichita for a couple of years, she had never visited this particular spot. We stood by the riverbank, mesmerized by the view, as families gathered for an evening event. I checked my watch, and when the time hit 9:44 p.m., I moved closer to her and casually draped my arm around her shoulders. She accepted the gesture with a smile and a little shake, leaning into me. Just as the clock struck 9:45, 7 fireworks erupted over the river with a loud bang, sending flames soaring into the night sky. Startled by the noise, Anne jumped into my arms, trembling slightly until she realized I was holding her securely. She looked up at me, wide-eyed, and said, "You knew that was going to happen, didn't you?" "Yep," I replied, grinning. "You don't need to be surprised to get a hug. Just ask, and I'll be happy to hold you." With a smile, she replied, "Well, now I know." Then, we shared a gentle kiss, filled with care and the desire to be closer. Once the fireworks display ended, we walked back to my truck, linking arms. I walked her to her apartment, checking to ensure no one else was around before turning to say goodbye. "Don't you want to stay a bit longer?" she asked, her voice shy. "I'd love to stay for as long as you want, but I think it's best if I head home after our first date," I said, trying to keep the mood light. "I want to plan when we can meet again this month." To my surprise, Anne took a step closer and wrapped her arms around me tightly. This was a wonderful night for me. Please come back tomorrow at 6:30 for dinner," she said earnestly. The next evening, I showed up right at 6:30 p.m. with a bouquet of red roses for my new girlfriend. She opened the door wearing a beautiful yellow sundress, her playful expression lighting up the space. "Oh, those flowers are lovely," she exclaimed, but then she added with a teasing tone, "I was just about to leave for a date with someone else. I don't want to be late, so could you please put these in some water? Oh, and lock the door when you leave. Bye." With that, she dashed out the door. I stood there for a moment, watching the flowers droop in my hands, stunned. What just happened? I quickly found a vase, filled it with water, and placed the flowers inside before heading back to the door. As soon as I opened it, I was met with Anne laughing at my bewildered expression. "You surprised me with the flowers last night, I had to get you back tonight. Are we even now?" she asked with a cheeky grin. "I guess we are, at least for now," I replied, feeling a bit awkward but amused. "Come on in," she said, taking my arm and leading me inside. "I hope you like what I've made for dinner tonight." As we sat down to eat, she offered me a choice between wine and beer, and I chose the beer. We settled in, laughing about the previous night and enjoying each other's company. The conversation flowed easily, and we exchanged small, caring touches, just gentle moments of connection. With the soft glow of a lamp illuminating the room, there was an unspoken understanding of where the night might lead. In the cozy room next to the living room, the atmosphere was filled with the scent of dinner wafting through the air, but in was a bundle of nerves. Throughout the meal, she kept nervously glancing at me, constantly apologizing as if unsure whether I liked the food. Finally, I took her hands in mine and said, "Stop worrying. I love the food, and I love the way you made it. You never need to apologize unless I tell you otherwise. If your hands made it, I'm sure I'll love it." Her face brightened at my words, and I could see the tension begin to melt away. We both settled into a more relaxed state, filling the rest of dinner with laughter and light-hearted conversation about the things that mattered most to us. After we finished eating, Anne suggested, "Why don't you sit on the couch while I clean up the kitchen?" I obliged and sank into the cushions, but after a few minutes, I found myself wandering back to her. I gently placed my hands on her hips, leaning closer to breathe in the fresh scent of her hair. "You smell amazing," I murmured softly. She turned to face me, a smile breaking across her face. "Thanks," she replied, her cheeks flushing slightly. I leaned in closer, noticing a slight shiver run through her, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she continued washing the dishes, occasionally shrugging her shoulders as I gently touched her arms, trying to keep things light and easy. Standing close behind her, I let my hands rest on the countertop, surrounding her with my presence. Then, as if sensing a moment of intimacy, she slowly turned to face me, and we shared a quiet moment that seemed to stretch on. "You're not going to let me finish the dishes, are you?" she asked, a teasing glint in her eyes. "Nope," I replied playfully. She whispered, "So what are we going to do instead?" "Let me think about that," I said, placing my hands just below her arms and gently sliding them down to her knees. I softly rubbed the backs of her knees and calves, then began to raise my hands, catching the hem of her dress. My gaze locked onto her beautiful blue eyes, filled with curiosity and warmth. When my hands reached her arms, I noticed she wasn't wearing a top underneath. She raised her arm straight up, allowing me to pull the dress off over her head, carefully laying it across a nearby chair. "Wow, I didn't realize how lovely you are," I said, taking a moment to admire her. "I've always appreciated your face and personality, but your beauty is truly remarkable, Annie." I stepped closer, wrapping my arms around her, and kissed her gently. She kissed me back with equal softness, a tender moment shared between us. When we finally pulled away, she took my hand and led me to her bedroom. She lay down on the bed, beckoning me to join her with a radiant smile. Settling beside her, I said, "You had a chance to admire me. Can I do the same with you?" The joy in her expression told me she was more than happy with my attention. I gently touched her, showing her just how much I appreciated her. I could see in her eyes that she was ready for more. Without hesitation, she shifted slightly, allowing me to see her better, her smile inviting me closer. "Bobby, please, could we share a special moment together?" she asked, her voice soft and sweet. How could I say no? Everything was going smoothly, and the warmth between us felt genuine. As we moved together gently, her soft sounds indicated that we were both enjoying the moment. We found a beautiful rhythm that felt wonderful, and I made sure to take my time, wanting to keep the experience special for both of us. As we continued, I could see her expression change, softening with joy, and her eyes sparkled with happiness. I felt myself reaching my own peak of emotion as everything around us intensified and felt utterly rewarding. Eventually, we both caught our breath, feeling joyful and content in each other's arms. Just as I began to shift away, she looked at me, her voice pleading. "No, please stay close to me." I shifted back, resting on my elbows, staying close so we could continue to enjoy each other's company. With a dreamy expression, she said, "Bobby, you may not be my first, but you're definitely my favorite." "I want to be your last," I replied sincerely, hoping she could see how much I meant it. She smiled mischievously, her eyes sparkling. "I like where your head is at. So when's our next special moment? Later tonight or tomorrow morning?" I patted my chest playfully and said, "Both." For the next 3 months, we spent every evening and weekend together. The time had come for me to meet her parents, and I felt a bit shy. I didn't have a family of my own, and it felt strange to visit hers, especially since they had lived on the same ranch for generations. Our plan was to leave right after work on Friday afternoon and return to Wichita on Sunday night. As I started my truck, I turned to Ann and asked for directions to her family's ranch. "Drive west from Wichita for about 2.5 hours until you reach Wyatt Earp Boulevard in Dodge City," she instructed. "Continue west on Wyatt Earp until you see El Capitan. That's the big longhorn steer statue in the middle of the street. Turn left at El Capitan, heading south. If you pass Boot Hill, you've gone too far. Once you're heading south, keep going until you cross the Santa Fe Trail, then turn west off the paved road." "Wait a second," I interrupted. "What kind of directions are these? Where's the address for my GPS? And why aren't you staying awake to help me?" "Bobby, those are the directions to the ranch. You'll be fine. I'm a bit tired after last night, so I need some rest. Just wake me up when we're south of Dodge City." With that, she grabbed a pillow and laid her head down, a soft smile gracing her lips. The next 2.5 hours were fairly uneventful. There weren't many stoplights, so I used each one as an opportunity to stretch and keep my legs from getting stiff. As I drove, the city lights of Dodge City finally appeared on the horizon. I passed 2 large cattle processing plants and several towering grain silos until I saw a street sign that read Wyatt Earp Boulevard. "Wow, her directions are working so far," I thought, feeling a sense of accomplishment. A few blocks later, I spotted the statue of the longhorn steer standing proud in the street. I felt a rush of excitement. I was almost there. I glanced over at Ann, who seemed to be resting but wasn't truly asleep. She was too detail-oriented to let me wander off into the prairie looking for an old cattle trail. Gently, I nudged her awake. "Not again, dear," she murmured, still half asleep. "Can you wait just a bit longer? Come on, wake up before I end up in Oklahoma." "Okay, Bobby, where are we?" she asked, pretending to be asleep, but I could tell she was just teasing me. "Oh great, there's the Miller place. Just 3 miles to go," I announced, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. She began to style her hair, touching up her appearance in the rearview mirror. With a grin, I said, "You might want to get ready, we're about to meet the family." As we turned off the gravel road, the sign for Clear Creek Ranch came into view, its weathered letters declaring its establishment in 1872. The ranch house soon appeared, flanked by several barns and pens, giving the place a welcoming, rustic charm. A couple in their 50s stepped out of the house, their faces lighting up with excitement as they spotted their daughter. But before the truck had even come to a complete stop, Ann jumped out, sprinting towards her mother for a warm embrace. By the time I climbed out of the cab, she had already hugged her father and planted a kiss on his cheek. "Mom, Dad, this is Bobby Smith," she introduced me with a proud smile. I took off my cap and extended my hand to Bill, who shook it firmly. Pat welcomed me with a friendly hug, her warmth instantly putting me at ease. "Come on inside, we're about to have a late dinner," Pat said, guiding us toward the ranch house. Ann followed her mother to help finish preparing the meal, leaving me with the somewhat awkward task of making small talk with the father of the woman I had grown close to over the last few months. It struck me how different this was. Each woman I had been with before had no family I got to know, so this experience felt both new and a bit nerve-wracking. "So, it's quite a trip from Wichita," Bill said, breaking the ice. "Would you like something to drink? We have tea, water, beer, whiskey, or bourbon." "Cold water followed by a cold beer would be great, thank you," I replied. "No need to call me sir, Bobby. Just Bill works for everyone here, he chuckled, pouring me a glass of water before fetching a cold beer from the fridge. When he returned, he mentioned, Anne's brother, Gary, isn't here tonight. He had to attend a meeting in Dodge. You'll meet him tomorrow. Gary's single and lives in a mobile home on one of the other ranches. Since I didn't have family stories to share, I began asking about the pictures and memorabilia displayed around the family room. Bill was a wealth of information about Clear Creek Ranch, which had been homesteaded by Pat's family. They were cattle ranchers who had registered one of the first cattle brands in the county. The brand was two C's side by side, marked on the unfortunate cow's right sides, he said with a chuckle. As he spoke, I admired the many photos of cowboys and cowgirls scattered throughout the room, all tied to either Pat or Bill. Both had grown up in large families, so Anne had plenty of cousins, nieces, and nephews. Among the family photos, I noticed images of historic figures like Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, and Doc Holliday. These weren't just copies, they were original photographs. Bill's grandfather even appeared in a few of them, a silent observer in the background. There was even a receipt signed by Wyatt Earp for a gun he bought after dealing with a troublesome individual. What caught my attention most was the display of 1873 Winchester rifles mounted on the wall. Known as the rifle that won the West, these guns had been used by their family to defend against coyotes, thieves, and various challenges. I was captivated by the stories these guns could tell, but Bill and I decided to save our exploration of history for later. At dinner, I listened intently as Pat shared stories about the Carter family, which intertwined nicely with Bill's family history. It was fascinating to learn more about Anne's background, feeling more connected to her with each story. Later that evening, Bill mentioned he needed to head to bed to wake up early the next day. My stomach nodded at the thought of where I would sleep. Would it be presumptuous to think I could sleep near Anne? To keep the conversation moving, I suggested, I'll go outside and grab our bags, that way the Greens can decide where I'll sleep. When I returned, however, they hadn't made a decision yet. I stepped forward and asked, isn't there a bunkhouse near the barn? When I was a kid, I dreamed of being a cowboy and sleeping in a bunkhouse. Would you let me live out that childhood dream? Pat interjected, oh, you can't sleep in that old place. The bed has squeaky springs, and it's hard to get a good night's sleep on it. Maybe that's true, I countered, but I don't often get to fulfill my childhood hopes. What time should I come back inside? She shook her head playfully. Breakfast starts at 8 a.m. I'll see you then. I grabbed my bag and headed toward the bunkhouse, excitement bubbling inside me. Let me show you the way, Bill said, walking alongside me. As we strolled through the night, we talked about the stunning starry sky above us. Out here, away from city lights, the stars shone brightly, almost like a blanket of diamonds draped over the world. Once inside the bunkhouse, Bill pointed out a few quirks of the bathroom. Then he added, Bobby, you don't have to stay here. You can stay with Anne if you want. Sir, it doesn't feel right for me to stay with your daughter in your house, I replied, trying to be respectful. This room is fine for me. I've stayed in much worse places during my time in the army. This will work. Bill smiled, shook my hand, and headed back to the house. Pat was right, the bed wasn't very comfortable, but I was exhausted and content with my life. There was no air conditioning in the bunkhouse, but out here on the high plains, summer nights can be surprisingly cool, even if daytime temperatures reach nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I opened the windows and propped the screen door to let in the fresh night breeze. As I lay there, I soon drifted off to sleep. I woke to an unusual sound, the screen door creaked open, and soft footsteps approached my bed. My heart raced as I recognized the silhouette moving toward me. Hey, I was going to surprise you, Anne whispered, a playful glint in her eyes. You did surprise me. I didn't expect you to come here so late, I replied, a smile breaking across my face at the sight of her. Bobby, my parents were really impressed with you tonight. They like you a lot, especially Dad. He appreciated that you chose to sleep out here. If you had insisted on staying with me, he might have sent you back out here. I couldn't help but chuckle at the thought. I appreciate it, but since this is my first time meeting your parents, I think I'll stick to the bunkhouse. I wasn't just making up that story about wanting to sleep in a bunkhouse as a kid. When I was younger, I dreamed of being a cowboy. It was my way of escaping the tough times with my family. As we sat on the edge of the bed, I pointed to the pictures on the wall. Your family has such an interesting history, especially those photos from Dodge City. They really capture the spirit of the West. Anne leaned in closer, her excitement infectious. I love hearing about the history too. My family has been through so much, and I feel proud to be a part of it. With that, we shared stories late into the night, the stars outside twinkling like the dreams we held. The warmth between us grew, and for a moment, everything felt right in the world. As I stood in front of the bunkhouse, a wave of nostalgia washed over me. Wyatt, Anne, and all the others who had shared this space filled my mind with memories of my happier childhood days. The warm glow of those moments lingered, reminding me of simpler times. In the darkness, Anne's voice broke through my thoughts, soft and inviting. "Let me add to those happy memories," she whispered. Though I couldn't see her, I could feel her presence, a comforting warmth that filled the air. We shared a quiet moment together, the connection between us palpable. The bed springs creaked as Anne shifted, and for a fleeting instant, I caught a glimpse of her silhouette in the faint light filtering through the window. We lay there in silence, savoring the simple joy of being near each other, wrapped in the peaceful ambience of the night. Each gentle touch exchanged between us felt like a promise, a reminder of what it meant to be understood and cared for. Time seemed to slip away as we settled into that calmness, no words needed. Just being together was enough. As playful banter filled the space, I tried to match the joy that radiated from Anne, her laughter ringing like music in the stillness of the night. It lifted my spirits, and even as the laughter faded, her small gestures of affection spoke volumes. Leaning closer, she nudged me with a playful grin, requesting the same tenderness in return. I happily obliged, feeling our connection deepen with each exchange. When she finally moved away slightly, resting her head on my shoulder, I felt an overwhelming surge of affection. "I love you so much, Anne. This is wonderful." "I love you too, Bobby." "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, a soft chuckle escaping her lips. "You know, I never thought I would sneak out to see one of the workers here. But there's always a first time for everything. Are you staying with me tonight, or are you going back inside?" I asked, reluctant to let this moment end. "I should go back inside," she said, glancing toward the door. "I just wanted to come out here to tell you how much you mean to me. I've always tried to make my parents proud, and I want them to think I'm still that good girl." "Oh, you're a very good girl," I replied playfully. "Good night, my love. I'll see you at breakfast." As she turned to leave, the thought of her lingered in my mind. I drifted off to sleep, feeling content. I stayed awake just long enough to watch her slip out through the screen door before finally closing my eyes, allowing the gentle rhythm of the night to cradle me into slumber. I awoke to the sun rising, its golden rays spilling through my open window, casting warm light across the room. The hot water heater wasn't on yet, so I braved a quick cold shower to shake off the remnants of sleep. Dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, I ventured outside, drawn by the sounds coming from the machine shed. As I approached, I spotted a young man struggling to change a large truck tire, his brow furrowed with concentration. Rather than startling him, I called out, "Good morning." "That's a tough start to the day." "Morning," he replied, a hint of annoyance in his tone. "This tire is really getting on my nerves. Do you want some help with that?" I offered, stepping closer. "I've done this kind of work before." "Sure, if you can go to the other side, we can lift it together." "I'll put on the lug nuts," he said, his expression brightening. Working together made the task easier, and we finished quickly. As we crawled out from under the truck, Gary extended a hand. "Thanks. I could have done it alone, but it would have worn me out for the rest of the day." I'm Gary, by the way. Nice to meet you, Gary. I'm Bobby, I replied, smiling. Bobby? I heard someone call you Mr. Wonderful from Anne, he chuckled. I laughed in response. I don't know why she says that. She's way smarter than I am. Just ask her if you don't believe me. Gary let out a hearty laugh, clearly amused. If it's not too much trouble, could you help me again? I need to take this lane 8000 to the shop to fix the hydraulic lift before harvest. Sure. Just as long as I make it back in time for breakfast at 8, I replied. Sounds good. Do you want to drive my pickup or yours? Gary asked. Why not let me drive this big rig? I suggested. Just give me the address, and I'll head to town. I'm sure you have better things to do than take a slow trip to the shop this morning. I jumped into the cab and started the powerful engine, feeling the vibration resonate through me as I backed out of the machine shed, steering the big machine toward Dodge City. I noticed Gary watching me, probably assessing whether I could handle driving such a rig. The radio was tuned to a local country music station, which filled the cab with a warm, familiar ambience. Though Gary left the farm a bit later than I did, we arrived at the repair shop around the same time. On the way back, Gary said, "Thanks for helping me this morning. Otherwise, I would have had to call one of the workers for a ride. You really know how to handle a rig like our Big Red. Where did you learn that?" I spent 2 years in the Army fixing vehicles, I explained. We had to be licensed to drive the ones we repaired. We used that truck from late June to the first full week of July to transport wheat to the big white concrete grain elevators you saw when you came into town. Wow, that's interesting. Gary replied. We hire local people to drive the truck so Dad and I can keep the combines running. That way, I can take time off to help Mom prepare meals and deliver food to all the workers spread over 10 miles. Since Ann will be here working anyway, do you want a job driving the wheat truck for us? The pay isn't great, and the cab gets pretty hot. We work long hours, but the food is good, and the satisfaction of getting the job done is even better, he added. You make it sound appealing, I said with a laugh. How can I say no? We exchanged stories about airplanes and wheat farming as we made our way back to Clear Creek Ranch. Arriving at 7:30 a.m. after cleaning up in the bunkhouse, I headed into the main house, where it seemed like everyone knew Gary and I had gone out for a little ride. Bill greeted me with a knowing smile. I see you met Gary this morning. I'm surprised he let you drive Big Red into town. He's very protective of that truck. Only experienced drivers get to handle it during the harvest. Yeah, he explained how it's used during the wheat harvest, I replied. Hey, Ann, I got offered a new job this morning, I said, excitement bubbling within me as I turned to her. She looked at me, her expression curious and hopeful, and I knew this was just the beginning of a new adventure. I'm going to drive Big Red during the harvest. It should be fun. What do you think? Does that fit into your plans? I asked, excitement bubbling in my chest. Ann laughed, a light, melodic sound that made me grin. So my brother told you I'd be here cooking and delivering meals to the harvest workers, and you think you're clever. After a brief prayer, our breakfast was ready, perfectly suited for the hard work these farmers put in every day. The sizzling bacon and fluffy pancakes were just what we needed to fuel our energy. During lunch, I noticed Pat and Bill exchanging odd glances. It was then that Bill cleared his throat and asked, Ann, have you been having trouble sleeping lately? I thought I saw you walking around in your sleep last night. Pat couldn't contain her giggles as Ann turned bright red, hastily stuffing scrambled eggs into her mouth to avoid speaking. She glanced at me, looking for a clever comment, but I just shrugged and smiled. Ann finally put down her fork, looking a bit worried. I was just concerned about Bobby staying in the hired man's room. There might be spiders in there since no one uses it anymore. Plus, Bobby forgot to say goodnight. Her words prompted laughter from everyone, including Ann, lightening the mood. The rest of the day saw Ann and me going our separate ways. She stuck with Pat while I left with Bill, who had dreams of being a cowboy. He took me around Clear Creek Ranch, a part of Pat's family heritage. Bill and Pat had expanded the ranch by adding parcels from other properties over the years, and now they managed about 3,000 acres of lush native grass. This grass had been around since the days of Native Americans and buffalo, a piece of living history. They had 250 black cows grazing year-round, and every fall, they would buy another 1,000 young cattle to care for through the winter and early spring before sending them off to commercial feedlots. We rarely drove on paved roads when moving between ranches, it was all dirt and dust out here. If we happened to see another truck, we'd stop and chat about the weather and the cattle market. It was clear that Bill loved this life and was quite successful in ranching. When we returned to the ranch, we found Gary in the machine shed. I lit up a cigarette and walked over to chat with him. He looked at my cigarette and said, "You know she's going to want you to quit, right?" "Yep, we've talked about it. We're in the negotiation phase now," I replied. He raised an eyebrow. "How's that going to work?" "My grandfather was in France during World War II, and he used to trade cigarettes for favors with the local women. I'm guessing you're using that as a guide?" I chuckled. "Do you think it will work?" He smiled knowingly. "You have no chance, my friend. You're in trouble. By the way, since I can't buy any tobacco products, I need to ask you for a smoke." I was really starting to enjoy my time with Gary. That evening, we had a barbecue at a neighbor's ranch. A large grill was set up in the backyard, and as we drove up, the atmosphere was lively, with the smell of smoke wafting through the air. The rancher provided delicious steaks, and all the women brought their best side dishes, including Ann. There were games for the kids, and an old concrete slab from a long-gone building became our dance floor. I danced slowly within during the slow songs, but when the tempo picked up, I headed over to the refreshment area. Several young men kept her busy during those faster tunes, spinning her around like a doll. When the music switched back to slow, those guys would try to pull her close, but she would push them away, waving her finger at me to come back and dance with her. It was a wonderful evening. We were all tired as we returned to Clear Creek Ranch. I wished Ann good night and walked to the bunkhouse, overhearing Pat and Bill teasing her about her playful sleepwalking. An hour later, I was jolted awake by the sound of the screen door creaking open. This time it was Ann sneaking into the bunkhouse, her spirit mischievous. Without saying a word, she playfully pulled the sheet off me and moved closer, her smile inviting me to join her. In that moment, warmth and connection enveloped us. "Get up," she whispered. I quickly responded, slightly confused. She slipped past me and lay down on the single bed. The old bed creaked amusingly as she settled in, and then she said one word, "Now." I was caught off guard but ready. Then she added, "If Mom and Dad are going to tease me about being in the bunkhouse with you, I'll make sure they hear us. I want this to last." Following her cue, I noticed every sound we made echoed in the quiet room. The bed creaked in a regular rhythm as our movements grew more synchronized. With each moment that passed, the tension between us heightened, and Ann encouraged me to pick up the pace. Soon, we were both fully engaged in our shared moment, lost in each other. After a quiet pause, it felt almost overwhelming. "Can you walk back to your room, or will you stay here with me?" I asked, my heart racing. "I'm staying with you as long as I can," she replied, her voice a soft murmur before drifting off to sleep beside me. Early the next morning, Ann made her way back to the house without being seen. Breakfast was served at 8 a.m., and everyone wore knowing smiles. No one mentioned how anyone slept, but the air was thick with unspoken understanding. The meal consisted of crispy bacon and fluffy pancakes. I was the last to be served, and all eyes were on me as a plate piled high with pancakes and a large steak was placed in front of me. Bill smiled and said, "I think you need this." Laughter erupted around the table, everyone joining in except for Gary, but I knew he would hear the story later. After breakfast, we went to Mass together as a family. I felt a sense of belonging, accepted as one of them. The way they treated me felt like I had finally found the family I had always wished for as an orphan, a family that loved and accepted me. In the late afternoon, Anne and I drove back to Wichita with bags of food and happy memories from our weekend. We decided to focus on our bond and shared experiences rather than anything else. The big change was that I moved into her apartment, taking another step toward becoming a family. 3 weeks later, we returned to Clear Creek Ranch once again. We were greeted with warm welcomes and friendly smiles. When I took my travel bag to the bunkhouse, I couldn't help but laugh at the sight of the old iron bed. It was the same one and had playfully pulled the sheets off just a few weeks ago, and somehow, it felt like home. As I settled in, I thought about the connection we had formed and the journey ahead. This was more than just a weekend, it was the start of something beautiful, and I was ready to embrace it fully. The room was transformed, featuring a new twin bed draped in soft, inviting linens, and pretty curtains framing the windows. A hot water heater had been installed, making it feel like a cozy retreat. On a small table sat a vase filled with bright sunflowers and a note that read, "Welcome home, son." The warmth of the gesture made me smile as I took in my surroundings. The main reason for our visit was the bustling wheat harvest. For farmers like Gary and Bill, this was the moment they'd been working toward since planting the crops last fall. It was crucial to gather the grain before unpredictable weather could ruin their hard work. Gary and I focused on organizing Big Red, making sure it was ready to head to the right fields at the right times. Thanks to everyone's diligence, we were set for the harvest without any major machine issues. It felt like a success. All the workers returned home safe, albeit tired at the end of each long day. By late July, we found ourselves back in Clear Creek once again. On Friday night, we spent quality time with the family, sharing stories and laughter over dinner. The next day, I rolled up my sleeves to help Bill and Gary clean and repair the tools and vehicles necessary for the harvest. As we worked, Anne entered the room, her energy infectious. "Guess what, everyone? We're going for a night ride to watch the Perseid meteor shower," she exclaimed, her excitement lighting up the room. I had never witnessed a meteor shower before, but I knew we'd be riding horses, which made me all the more eager. Anne prepared her buckskin mare, and I was assigned Bill's gelding. Once we saddled up, we set off down the long driveway, ready for an adventure under the stars. A mile later, Anne stopped at a gate, dismounted, and opened it, signaling for me to bring both horses through. She tied them to the gate and turned to me with a playful smile. "Please put your things in the saddlebag but keep your boots on," she instructed, her eyes sparkling. How could I say no to that? Seeing her still wearing her boots made my heart race. As I glanced at her, I noticed she pulled a towel from behind her and placed it beneath herself. "What's with the towel?" I asked, grinning at her. "I just want to keep my saddle clean," she replied, her smile infectious. We continued down the path through the tall grass, and I maneuvered my horse around her, sometimes behind her, sometimes beside her. Each view had its perks, but I particularly loved watching her ride gracefully, her joy brightening my day. After a while, we stopped on a hillside facing north, soaking in the peaceful view bathed in moonlight. There wasn't a soul nearby. Anne opened a bedroll she had tucked behind her saddle, pulled out a fresh blanket, and spread it out for us to sit on. "This is a special spot on our ranch," she said, looking around fondly. "My great-grandfather discovered springs here that provided water for his cattle, which helped our family survive. The water bubbles up from the rocks, and my dad drilled a pipe to send it to the tank over there." She pointed toward a small tank in the distance. Even the local tribes considered this place important. Although my great-grandfather owned this land, he always welcomed the local tribes to visit once a year. As she spoke, I could picture the history she described, cattlemen bringing a nice steer to the small Indian camp and local people helping round up cattle in the fall to move them to their winter grazing areas. "Tonight, we're going to watch the Perseid meteor shower," Anne continued, her eyes shining with excitement. "It takes place every July and August. We might see between 30 and 90 shooting stars while we lie here. This spot is perfect because there are no bright lights around. I've come here for this show every year since I was born. Mom and Dad ride up here too, and they talk about our family members who have been here for the last 130 years. I told the family we were coming here to enjoy this together. You're the first person I've brought here. Thank you for this special moment. Honestly, I didn't expect to be here, but it's even better than I imagined, I replied, my heart full. We turned to face each other, sitting cross-legged on the blanket. I took her hands in mine, feeling a surge of emotion. Anne, would you make me the luckiest man in the world by marrying me? Her reaction was instantaneous, a burst of excitement illuminating her face. I will marry you, Bobby Smith. Whenever, however, but definitely forever. I will be your wife. As we shared this beautiful moment, we leaned back to gaze at the shooting stars. The sight of her smiling face was truly special, and it felt magical to be lying there together under the vast sky, sharing this incredible night. Lost in the wonder of the stars and our future, and suddenly jumped up, exclaiming, "Look! I saw a shooting star." She pointed excitedly to two unusually bright stars close together, and beneath them was a fluffy cloud shaped like a huge smiley face. Anne took this as a sign from the universe that our love was meant to be. Moments later, the clouds drifted away, revealing a breathtaking view of the cosmos. "Could you give me a moment, please?" I asked, my heart racing. She looked at me with curiosity, a playful glint in her eyes. I stood up and walked over to my horse, where I opened the saddlebag and pulled out a small velvet box. It was difficult to keep it hidden when we were outside in the open air, and I had a feeling she might have already figured it out by the time I returned to the blanket. As I opened the box, the diamond sparkled in the moonlight, shimmering like the stars above. Anne gasped, her joy radiating from her. "You'll need to ask my father for his blessing to marry me," she said, her eyes shining with happiness. "I asked him earlier today. Didn't you notice how happy he looked at dinner?" I replied, grinning. She laughed. I thought it was because Mom was being sweet to him. We lay back on the blanket, enjoying the moment and the beautiful scenery. After a while, Anne stood up and said, "Shall we go clean up?" As she started walking away, I followed closely behind, happy just to be near her. In the middle of the pasture, we came across a water tank filled with cool, clear water. Anne stepped in and called out, "Come on. The water is nice." The water was crystal clear and felt refreshing against our skin. We splashed around, laughter echoing in the still night air, brightening our spirits. Eventually, we decided we were clean enough to get dressed again, and we held hands as we rode back to the barn. Once we took care of the horses, and made a surprising decision. "I think I'll stay with you in the bunkhouse tonight," she declared, a mischievous smile on her lips. "Sounds perfect," I replied, feeling an overwhelming sense of happiness as we prepared for a night filled with promise and new beginnings. Anne proudly displayed her engagement ring to everyone nearby, her joy radiating like sunlight. Her mother's eyes glistened with tears of happiness, and her father wore a look of pride that filled the room. Our friend Gary beamed with happiness for us both. This engagement marked the beginning of a long journey filled with planning every little detail of our wedding. I couldn't help but feel for Anne, though, because my mother wasn't there to help us navigate the whirlwind of preparations. The ceremony took place at the quaint Greens neighborhood church. It wasn't a grand building, but we expected a crowd of friends, neighbors, and family to fill the pews. I didn't bother asking Bill how many animals he had to prepare for the wedding meal. I figured that was a conversation for another time. Gary stood by my side as my best man, with 3 of my coworkers serving as groomsmen. Anne had 4 of her cousins standing with her at the altar, looking radiant in their dresses. To keep the focus away from my lack of family, Bill enlisted the ushers to help seat the guests on both sides of the aisle. The ceremony went off without a hitch, and everyone seemed to enjoy themselves, especially my work friends who had a great time dancing with Anne's lively cousins. 2 days later, we boarded the Amtrak Southwest Chief from Dodge City to Santa Fe, New Mexico, leaving bright and early at 5:55 a.m. The week we spent there was nothing short of wonderful, filled with adventures at the hotel and exploring the vibrant city. After our trip, we returned home, ready to start our life together like any young couple. Little did we know that our journey would take an unexpected turn. Several years later, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, I received a call from the city police that turned my world upside down. Anne had been in a serious car accident and was in the hospital. My heart raced as I rushed to the hospital, the urgency of the situation weighing heavily on me. In my panic, I called Bill, even though I felt guilty for burdening him with my worries. He was the only person I felt comfortable reaching out to at that moment. When I arrived at the hospital, the doctor met me with a grim expression. He informed me that Anne was in critical condition, suffering from severe damage to her heart and other organs. He assured me that there were no signs of brain damage yet but allowed me a brief visit with her, just enough time for her to know I was there and wanted her to fight. Anne. I called softly, and to my relief, she opened her eyes, though they looked hazy and unfocused. "I'm right here with you," I whispered, squeezing her hand gently. "Your parents are on their way." She gripped my hand tightly, her fingers warm against mine, until a nurse gently informed me it was time to leave. Bill and Pat arrived about 2 hours later, and I quickly ushered them into the room, knowing it would mean stepping out myself. We felt so helpless, but we took turns staying with Anne throughout the night, ensuring someone was always by her side. The next morning brought news that shattered any remaining hope. The doctor explained that her kidneys were failing, and it was affecting her other organs as well. He apologized, saying there was nothing they could do except make her comfortable. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. "Does she know about this?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. The doctor sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's a remarkable nurse, she has kept us on our toes this whole time. She understands the gravity of her injuries." Pat gasped, and Bill turned away, tears streaming down his cheeks, soaking into my shirt. The doctor continued, "She will likely pass today, so I've allowed all three of you to visit her together." Bill stepped outside to call Gary, urging him to come quickly. Pat and I embraced tightly, allowing ourselves a moment of sorrow before collecting ourselves to go back into Anne's room. As I led the way inside, I heard her soft voice greet me. "Hi there, cowboy. I'm glad you're here. There's no place I'd rather be than by your side." Just then, Bill walked in and gently touched her forehead. "Hello, princess," he said, his voice a whisper. Anne smiled, her expression both peaceful and pained. "I'm happy you're all here. I only have the strength to say this once, so please listen closely. I'm so grateful to have shared my life with the three of you. You are all so special to me, and I love you." She took a deep breath, her eyes flickering between us. "When I leave, I don't want you to feel sad. Remember only the fun times we had, not the fact that you'll miss me. I know you'll keep me in your hearts, but don't let sadness hold you back. Bobby, you are my true love. I want you to find happiness again, start a family, and create the life you've always dreamed of. Please do this for me. I will always be with you in spirit, I'll be your guardian angel until we meet again." Turning to her parents, she said, "Mom, Dad, thank you for everything you've done for me. I love and cherish you both. Please do me one last favor, take care of Bobby. You are his only family now, and I'm worried about how he will manage without me." She looked exhausted, her voice trailing off. "I'm really tired now, so I need to rest for a few minutes. Then we can talk again." She squeezed my hand, a silent assurance that she was still present. Her sleep, however, was restless, she would moan and mumble occasionally. Around mid-morning, she squeezed my hand tightly, and then let go. Her face relaxed, and her arm felt lifeless in my grasp. She had passed away. Earlier, we had asked the doctor to disconnect her from the monitors to make the moment gentler, and he had agreed. The three of us stood there in silence, embracing each other without uttering a word. I stepped outside to inform the nurse that it was over. We decided to share Anne's ashes in 3 parts, one for burial at their church, one to scatter at the ranch, and one jar to mix with mine and spread at her favorite spot on the hillside. The gathering was solemn, filled with familiar faces from the community. I had been staying in the bunkhouse while sorting out the details, taking an extra 2 weeks off from work to be at the ranch. When I finally returned to work, it felt good to help clear my mind and focus better. Every weekend, I drove to Clear Creek to assist Gary with various projects around his place. It lifted my spirits, and I often felt like Anne was watching us from the porch, smiling down on us. Most evenings, I rode to her special spot on the hillside, sitting quietly to reflect on the moments we shared. Gradually, I found myself joining more of the Green family's gatherings. We celebrated Easter Sunday at her favorite spot to catch the sunrise, and I attended Mother's Day and Father's Day events with Pat, Bill, and Gary. The neighborhood barbecues were bittersweet, bringing back fond memories of Anne. One day in November, Gary invited me to join him and his friends for the opening day of pheasant hunting. Slowly but surely, I was moving forward, even though a part of me resisted the change. I didn't want to let her go, but life demanded that I keep moving. As I stood at her favorite spot, the crisp air filled with the sounds of nature around me, I realized that while Anne might be gone, the love we shared would forever echo in my heart. It was time to honor her memory by embracing the life we had dreamed of together. Christmas and Thanksgiving had been tough for all of us, but as the holidays wrapped up, we slowly began to get our lives back on track. Every few months, Gary would visit Wichita, and we would go out to enjoy ourselves, finding moments of laughter amidst the sorrow of loss. A year and a half after we said goodbye to Anne, Gary and I found ourselves at a lively Western bar and dance hall in Wichita, a place filled with the twang of country music and the laughter of patrons. As we settled at our table, 2 young women dressed in stylish Western attire strolled by, their smiles brightening the dimly lit room. With a spark of confidence fueled by Anne's earlier encouragement, we left our drinks behind and invited them to dance. For the next hour, Gary danced with a woman named Shelley while I partnered with Kathy. The rhythm of the music filled the air, and I found myself losing the awkwardness I once felt on the dance floor. Kathy stepped away for a moment to grab us some drinks, and that's when Shelley, with a playful smile, leaned in and asked, "Would you please dance with me?" "Of course," I replied, and we headed back to the dance floor for a slow song. As we swayed together, Shelley said, "You know, I'm really not into Gary. Kathy says she doesn't mind being with him, but honestly, I know we just met, but I'd love to spend more time with you." How could I say no to someone as lovely as her? "Just between us," I said with a grin, "I liked you first. Gary just got to pick first." Shelley laughed, "Looks like I really chose the guy who talks a lot, didn't I?" "Yep, but I'm better looking and a better dancer too," I joked back, and we spent the rest of the evening talking, laughing, and dancing. By the end of the night, I had her phone number and asked if she would like to have dinner on Sunday night. To my delight, she agreed. Gary seemed to hit it off with Kathy as well, although it was clear she wasn't planning to visit him in Dodge City. As for Shelley and me, that Sunday turned out to be wonderful. There was a brief moment of uncertainty when she asked how I knew Gary, but when I explained that he was my brother-in-law, my late wife's brother, and how we went pheasant hunting every fall, she nodded in understanding. We didn't dwell on the past but focused on enjoying our time together. As the weeks passed, we developed a routine. Midweek, we'd sneak in a date just to spend some quality time together, and on Saturdays, we always enjoyed dinner and a movie. We loved to dance, and it became our thing. Sundays were spent driving around, chatting, and grabbing ice cream cones, simple moments that brought us happiness. Neither of us was new to relationships. Shelley had been with 3 guys before me. We took our time getting closer, and after 2 months, we shared moments that felt significant. It was this bond that made me care for her deeply, and before long, she decided to move in with me. She became my love and my everything. Shelley was supportive when I went away for a week to help with the wheat harvest and to go hunting. In fact, those separations helped us realize just how much we cared for each other. We had a lot in common and became a strong couple. She wanted 2 kids, and I did too. She dreamed of a cozy house after we got married, and I was all in on that idea. Shelley worked in the accounting department of a local hospital. She had some college education, but not a lot. Everything was going great until one day, when I came home from work and found her sitting on the couch with tears streaming down her face. "Please forgive me, Bobby," she cried. "I made a mistake, and I can't change it. I'm so sorry." My heart raced with worry. "I don't like what I'm hearing," I said cautiously. "I'm scared I might lose you. I'll forgive you, but you need to tell me what happened so we can address it." "No, you'll kick me out. Please, I love you. Please stay with me." Her voice cracked with desperation. After several minutes of her distress, I finally interrupted. "Stop. Just tell me now, or I'm going to the bar. I can understand drunk people better than this, so talk now." "I'm pregnant, Bobby," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. We talked about waiting until we were married and settled. I messed it up. Please forgive me." I was taken aback. She had been on birth control, and this news was completely unexpected. Gently, I held her face in my hands. "I have 2 questions for you, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. I won't let you come back later and change your mind. Are you ready?" "Yes," she cried. "Okay, listen carefully. Shelley, I love you so much. Will you marry me?" It took her a moment to process my words. "You're not upset about the pregnancy? You want to marry me?" "Oh, Bobby, I would love to marry you," she exclaimed, relief washing over her. "Thank you for being so understanding. I'm really happy to ask you this. I want to build a life with you and cherish our future together." I smiled at her, but then I added, "Now, for my next question." She had stopped crying, though she was still wiping her eyes. "Can we name our baby Carter? I just love that name, whether it's a boy or a girl." She wrapped her arms around my neck, beaming with joy. "I love that name too. We're going to have a wonderful life with our baby." The next 2 months were filled with wedding planning and preparing for our little one. Every suggestion she made was practical and within budget, making it easy for us to agree on everything. Life in our apartment felt peaceful, except for the occasional challenge presented by her sister, Beth, who always insisted that things be done her way. Beth was adamant that I should spend 3 times my monthly salary on the engagement ring. I told Shelley that I would consider it fine if we could stay at her sister's house for 3 months without paying rent, food, or car bills. Beth didn't find that acceptable at all. Her husband, Hal, wasn't much help either. He kept teasing me about being budget conscious while boasting about his extravagant purchase of Beth's ring. I was well aware of Hal's financial situation, having made a series of reckless credit card purchases followed by declaring bankruptcy, thinking he was clever. The only disappointment during the wedding planning came from Shelley's parents, who wanted a grand event to impress their friends, and I knew that would be a challenge. Despite the hiccups along the way, we continued to focus on building our life together. Shelley and I learned to communicate openly, navigating the ups and downs of wedding preparations, financial constraints, and family expectations. We were committed to each other and excited for the future. Although Shelley and I had plenty of friends, many of them voiced their opinions on our wedding plans, particularly regarding finances. After some discussion, we decided to create a wedding that truly reflected our values and what was meaningful to us. I chose my best friend, Gary Green, as my best man, and we invited Pat and Bill, who graciously accepted. To my delight, Hap was there to celebrate with us as well. The day was filled with joy, but it was just the beginning of an even greater chapter in our lives. Shortly after the wedding, Shelley and I welcomed our son, Carter, into the world on March 3rd. He was a healthy, joyful baby, and Shelley took to motherhood beautifully, intuitively knowing how to care for him. I was more than happy to follow her lead, loving and holding Carter with a tenderness that came naturally. By June, we were ready for a new adventure. We decided to take Carter to Clear Creek Ranch for the start of the wheat harvest. I had cleared this with Bill and Pat beforehand, and when I mentioned our son's name, Pat became emotional with happiness. This trip marked Shelley's first real visit with Bill and Pat, as she had only briefly met them at our wedding. As we drove up to the ranch, Pat hurried over, almost colliding with Bill and their loyal dog, Sir Henry, just to get a glimpse of Carter. Pat wasted no time. She hugged Shelley warmly before scooping Carter into her arms and carrying him into the house. Shelley, while a wonderful mom, was grateful for the extra support and feminine touch that Pat provided. Her sister and mother tended to admire the baby from a distance, and then promptly asked Shelley, "Do you have anything for us to eat or drink?" Pat, with her motherly instincts, made sure to respect the boundaries that come with caring for a little one. As she fed and gently rocked Carter, she patiently waited for him to drift off to sleep. In the midst of this, Shelley seized a moment to ask me, "Can we go for a walk?" "Sure," I replied, curious about what was on her mind. Shelley took my hand, her grip reassuring. "I just want to walk with you, just the two of us. I love our son, but I also cherish the time we spend together," she said, her eyes sparkling under the afternoon sun. "I know Pat is really fond of Carter. It's almost like he's her own grandchild," she continued, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Well, technically, he is her only grandchild since I'm still her son-in-law." I nodded, understanding the bond she felt with Pat and Bill. "I consider Pat to be like a mother to me. She and Bill treat me like family, and I love them as my own parents, even though their daughter is no longer a part of my life. I hope my relationship with them doesn't bother you." She paused for a moment, then said, "I think you're handling everything really well." We strolled for about an hour, enjoying the peace and quiet that enveloped the ranch. When we returned, we found everything serene. Carter was asleep in Pat's arms, and she was busy in the kitchen, preparing a meal. Meanwhile, Gary and I connected to discuss our plans for the next day's work in the fields. Pat and Bill took turns holding and feeding Carter, and eventually, he settled down for the night. Shelley gazed up in amazement at the sky, marveling at how dark it had become. It was only when she looked up that she saw the stars twinkling brightly above us. As we carried Carter to the bunkhouse, we were pleasantly surprised to find a new baby bed waiting for us, complete with a blue blanket adorned with boots, saddles, and horses, a perfect touch for our little cowboy. It was clear that Carter was more than welcome to visit any time. After lunch, Shelley returned to our home. Initially, she had planned to leave after breakfast, but she and Pat got caught up in deep conversation, and time slipped away faster than we realized. I stayed on the ranch for a week, and then Gary drove me back to Wichita, picking up parts from the John Deere dealer along the way. 2 years later, Shelley welcomed our second son, Tyler. Pat visited us for a few days, joyfully taking care of Carter while Shelley spent precious time with the newborn. As the boys grew older, we made it a point to spend more time at the ranch. They were now old enough to ride horses and listen to Grandpa Bill's captivating cowboy stories. One memorable day, the 6 of us went to Boot Hill. The boys couldn't contain their excitement as they rode in a stagecoach, watched a staged gunfight on Front Street, and relished sarsaparillas at the Long Branch Saloon. We even took them to see the wagon tracks from the historic Santa Fe Trail, still faintly marked on the land. They thrived on the rich tapestry of cowboy history surrounding them. Every summer, we allowed the boys to stay at the ranch for a week or two. They quickly befriended local kids, galloping from one house to another on horseback for playdates. Pat and Bill took them to Sunday school, which helped them form even more connections in the community. The more time they spent at the ranch, the more they wanted to return. When Carter and Tyler were 10 and 12 years old, they asked if they could spend the entire summer at the ranch. After some discussion, we agreed to let them stay for the month of July, just after the harvest. By that point, Shelley had grown weary of ranch life. It had been enjoyable at first, but the hard work was starting to wear her down. While the boys were at the ranch, Shelley expressed her desire to go out dancing and socialize every night. As her 40th birthday approached, she yearned to fully embrace life again. She returned to work and started spending time with a group of younger women, rediscovering herself in the process. That fall, I took Carter with me on the annual pheasant hunt for the first time. He was brimming with excitement, having never seen a ring-necked pheasant before and eager to join the adventure with his friends. Our hunting group consisted of 10 men, 8 walked through the fields to stir up the birds, while 2 stood at the end to block their escape. The boys walked beside and behind their dads, soaking in the experience. By that afternoon, the boys learned how to prepare the birds for cooking. Each boy crafted a colorful headdress adorned with long feathers, a badge of their new adventure. That evening, we planned to feast on about a third of the birds we'd caught, saving the rest for the freezer. Carter proudly brought home some lovely feathers for Shelley to use in decorations. However, she didn't share his enthusiasm, and the feathers soon disappeared, disappointing him. The next summer, the boys eagerly requested to spend the whole summer at the ranch again. They assured us that we could visit whenever we liked. However, Shelley wasn't thrilled with the idea. She preferred that the boys stay in Wichita, but her desire to spend time with them waned. During the day, she focused on her work and socialized with friends several nights a week, often leaving the house at 7:30 a.m. I might not be home until late tonight, and that thought made the boys unhappy. Shelley and I had some arguments about her time away from home. While I trusted her to hang out with friends, I didn't like how much time she was spending with those particular friends. Pat called me while Bill was driving her and Gary to Wichita. I could tell she was upset, and then she shared some troubling news. Gary was very sick. He had struggled with kidney stones for years, and his smoking had made everything worse. Eventually, he developed serious kidney disease and needed a transplant. I learned that he had been on a waiting list for a suitable kidney for a while, but nothing had matched him. I knew he had health issues, but he never seemed to think they were that serious. Pat and Bill wanted to meet me when they arrived in town, so I made my way to the doctor's office to see if I could be a donor for Gary. The next few days were tough for the whole family. The boys were worried about Uncle Gary. As Gary's health deteriorated, we finally got the call. I was a perfect match for him. The transplant was scheduled for the next morning. That night, I went to visit Gary at the hospital. Despite his condition, he was hopeful about the transplant. "Thank you for doing this," he said, his eyes shining with gratitude. "It means a lot to me. It's like we're brothers, even if we come from different families." The next morning, we were taken into separate operating rooms. As we parted ways, I told him, "See you later." Little did I know that once Gary got into the operating room, his heart stopped, and the doctors couldn't bring him back. My doctor had already begun my surgery to remove my kidney when they informed him that Gary's surgery had been cancelled. When I woke up, Pat and Bill were by my bedside. I groggily asked, "Did Gary's surgery go okay?" Pat's face crumpled, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. Bill squeezed my hand tightly and said, "Gary had a heart attack during the surgery. The doctor said they couldn't do anything because his kidney had failed. He had too much fluid in his lungs and heart. It was just too much." We all cried, the weight of our loss crashing down on us. A nurse eventually came in to give me a sleeping pill, but the pain in my heart couldn't be eased that easily. Gary's funeral was held on a bright, sunny day, and every rancher in the area showed up to pay their respects. Shelley, the boys, and I sat with his family in the front row. After the service, Shelley took the boys home, but I stayed at the ranch to recover from my surgery. With Gary gone, he was supposed to take over the ranch, leaving Bill with a heavier workload. I planned to help him on weekends, but that choice upset Shelley. She wanted to enjoy her time with friends instead of taking care of 2 lively boys. We didn't argue loudly, but the tension lingered between us. One afternoon, Shelley came home from work, her face beaming with excitement. "Guess what? I was chosen to represent my department on the employee committee," she exclaimed. While there wasn't any extra pay involved, it gave her recognition and a chance to try something new. The hospital was hosting a special event with a well-known football player to raise money for a new wing for children. Lance Belton, a wide receiver for the Oakland Raiders, often visited Wichita to have his private plane serviced. His agent had arranged for him to speak and encourage donations to the hospital. At the luncheon, Shelley got the chance to sit at the main table with Lance. She was also part of the group taking him around the hospital to meet the kids while his plane was being prepped for its flight to Los Angeles. I decided to go watch, curious to see how it all unfolded. From a distance, I could see Shelley and her friends chatting excitedly with Lance, who was clearly enjoying the attention. I tried to get closer, but security was keeping everyone back. As the engine started, I noticed Lance put his arm around Shelley and gave her a friendly gesture. He then reached for her hand, leading her toward the plane. She looked hesitant, but her friends encouraged her to go. They walked together to the steps of the jet. Lance helped her onto the first step and began guiding her inside. As she reached the top step, laughter erupted among her friends. Then the door closed behind them, and the engines roared to life. I couldn't get near the plane, so I pulled out my phone and called Shelley. When she answered, her voice was cheerful. "Hello, dear. Guess who's going to Los Angeles for dinner tonight? The plane has to be in St. Louis tomorrow, so they're dropping me off on the way. See you tomorrow." And just like that, she hung up. I hurried over to her friends, desperate to find out what was happening. They laughed at my bewildered expression, saying, "Shelley's going to have the night of her life, flying on a private jet and living it up in style." Working in the aircraft industry, I knew exactly what they were implying, and it hit me like a brick wall. Why would she do something like this? The women around me noticed the distress on my face and kept teasing. One even said, "She'll be back to her ordinary life with you tomorrow, but tonight will be a night she won't forget." "Yeah, and she won't forget the divorce papers waiting for her when she gets back," I shot back, my determination bubbling over. That got their attention. One of them replied, "It's not a big deal. Don't ruin this for her. How often does someone get the chance to hang out with a pro athlete on a private jet? She deserves some fun." "Well, she better enjoy herself because it won't be easy when she comes back home," I said, feeling fed up with their comments. I left them there and headed to a store, picking up some boxes to pack her things. Afterward, I took an Uber to the airport, grabbed her car, and drove home to load it up. She'd have to figure out her own way back later. As I packed up the remnants of her life with me, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and sadness. I had just lost Gary, and now it felt like I was losing Shelley, too. She was chasing a dream of excitement while I was left to pick up the pieces of reality. Would she even want to come back after this night? The questions weighed heavy in my mind as I finished packing and prepared for whatever came next. It all began with a simple text. I received a message from Shelley, and as I opened it, I was greeted by a picture of her on a plane, a smug smile plastered across her face. The caption read, "Hey Bobby. Having a great time. Wish you were here." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I scrolled down to the next message, which was another photo of her laughing, clearly enjoying herself. Then came the message that made my heart sink, "We should celebrate when I get back, somewhere nice." That was all I needed to see. Shelley was sitting with Lance again, and this time, there was another man with him wearing a captain's hat. The caption under the photo stated, "Tonight's special menu included something extra." The implications were clear, and the anger and betrayal bubbled to the surface. The next morning, I called my supervisor and requested a few hours off to deal with some personal matters. He agreed without hesitation, and I set up a meeting with the divorce lawyer who seemed to be everywhere on TV. When I arrived at the office, I was surprised to find that the person I met wasn't the lead attorney but a young associate who seemed knowledgeable and experienced in cases where infidelity was a factor. "It's pretty straightforward in most situations," he began, leaning back in his chair. In a divorce like this, she would typically receive 90% of your combined assets, leaving you with only 10%. Since you have 2 kids, you'd also be on the hook for about 35% of your income in child support. Based on your current finances, you're barely getting by as it is, so after the divorce, your situation is unlikely to improve. He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. You'll probably need to find a second job just to make rent and cover basic living expenses. Extra expenses for your boys, like sports camps and activities, may become hard to afford. She could continue living in the house with your kids while you're stuck paying the mortgage, and she could do whatever she pleases. Frustrated, I asked, so there's really no way out of this? The best option might be to wait, he suggested. Once your sons are at least 14, they can choose who they want to live with. From what you've told me, they'd likely choose you. At that point, you could move forward with the divorce, and while it would still be costly, you wouldn't be responsible for child support anymore. Since your salaries aren't that different, the support payments shouldn't be too hard to manage. He laid out a plan for me. Don't shout, scream, or make threats. That only gives her more power in court. Get a small recording device and capture as many important conversations as you can. You can ask her to leave the house for a few days, but remember, she has rights to it. She can return by court order, so don't try to stop her. Hold off on any closeness until she goes through all necessary health checks. If she has been unfaithful once, she may do it again. We can use this to our advantage. I nodded, absorbing his advice, but my heart sank further when he said, you can't use her infidelity as a reason for divorce. However, if she wants to come back, ask for an agreement that states if either of you is unfaithful, that person gets nothing in the divorce, and you both will have equal rights to care for the boys. You have 2 paths to navigate this situation, neither of which is quick or easy. I'll help you with any specific terms you want in the agreement if you choose that route. The lawyer continued, cautioning me about the balance I had to strike. Be careful. If she finds a good lawyer and you anger her, it could lead to a tough few years for you. If she decides not to return, you might end up giving a significant portion of your earnings to her for years. His words echoed in my mind, but my primary goal now was to protect my boys from the chaos of divorce. I wanted to shield them from their mother's irresponsible behavior. If it meant playing along as a patient husband for a while, then that's what I would do. It wasn't what I wanted, but it felt like the best way to keep them away from her. After calming down, I resolved to follow his advice, but first, I needed to express how deeply she had hurt me. I had cared for Shelley immensely, but her betrayal cut me deeply. Last night, I had almost decided to toss all her belongings out, but thankfully, I had held back. I promised myself I would take action, but I also knew I had to wait. In basic training in the Army, I learned that patience is crucial. The best test is waiting until your enemy is in the perfect spot before making a move. I needed to plan carefully, especially since Lance would also be caught off guard. When I got home from work, it was just before Shelley arrived. The moment she walked in, I could see the annoyance etched on her face. Why did you bring my car back but not come to meet me? Didn't you get my messages? She snapped, her voice filled with frustration. It was hard for me to get home, and I'm not happy about it. I had turned off my phone to avoid the uncomfortable barrage of messages. Come sit with me and tell me about your trip, I suggested, moving to the comfy chair across the room so she wouldn't sit too close. With a smile that seemed forced, she began to recount her journey. It was a great trip. The takeoff was quick and thrilling. We climbed high really fast. The pilot took us south of Denver, and I got to watch the sunset over the mountains and the lights of the city. It was breathtaking. Her excitement was palpable, and I could see that she genuinely enjoyed herself. Sounds amazing, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. So, I heard you were going to join the Mile High Club on this flight. At the mention of the Mile High Club, her expression shifted momentarily as she hesitated, clearly searching for the right words. "What's the Mile High Club?" she asked slowly, a hint of guilt in her voice. I decided to keep pressing, curious to see how she would respond. "You know, it's the group for people who have romantic encounters on a plane at least a mile up in the sky. So, are you now a member?" Her reaction was immediate. "Oh my gosh, no." Lance was really respectful. He knew I was married to a wonderful man and that I would never betray him. She added that last part quickly, almost too quickly, and I couldn't help but notice the flicker of guilt in her eyes. "Then why did your friends say you were going to join?" I asked, my voice steady but my heart racing. Her face went pale, and she struggled to come up with a convincing response. "They were just joking around," she finally said, her voice lacking conviction. As I watched her fumble through her words, I felt a mix of anger and sorrow. This was the woman I had loved deeply, yet here she was, tangled in a web of lies. I knew then that I had to play my cards carefully. The stakes were high, and the future of my family depended on it. As the night wore on, I realized that this was just the beginning of a long and painful journey. But I was determined to fight for my boys and protect them from the fallout of their mother's actions. Shelley took a moment to collect herself before answering my question. "I'm not sure why they said that," she insisted, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "Nothing like that happened." I tried to remain calm. "So you didn't share any special moments with Lance?" I pressed. "Absolutely not," she replied firmly, her eyes narrowing. "I don't appreciate this line of questioning. Do you think I'm lying? Did you kiss him?" I asked, my tone unyielding. "Yes," she said, without hesitation. "Just a peck on the cheek." "Let me make sure I've got this right," I said, taking a deep breath. "The only time you kissed him was a simple peck on the cheek. You didn't know anything about the Mile High Club. You didn't plan anything with him on the jet to Los Angeles, and you didn't share any special moments with him or anyone else on either flight. Is that correct?" Shelley straightened her posture and replied, "That's the truth. I don't lie to you. I love you, and I don't appreciate you doubting me." "All right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Instead of questioning your honesty, let's take a look at some pictures that were sent to me from your phone." Her face went pale, and she tried to get up, clearly alarmed. "What? What do you mean?" I continued, "Here's a picture of you and Lance. Or is that not you?" As she stared at the image, her face drained of color. "Oh my God, where did you get that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Bobby, I'm so sorry. This is awful." "No, Shelley, this is just the beginning of what's awful," I replied calmly, holding up another picture. "Here's another one showing even more. Is this what you call nothing happening?" Shelley collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched in silence as the reality of her actions began to sink in. Through her tears, she murmured, "You weren't supposed to see those pictures. They were for me, just a reminder of that night. He must have sent them to you without me knowing. I didn't write those things." "This just makes it worse, doesn't it?" "Worse?" I echoed, struggling to keep my composure. "Shelley, you kept these as memories for yourself. For the rest of your life, you can recall this memorable evening whenever you look at those pictures. All this time, you were lying to me while seeing him. You treat me like I'm just some clueless husband who still loves his wife while she's out with someone else she barely knows. How tragic is this for both of us? Do you even love me anymore?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Am I really that bad that you do this to our marriage?" Through her sobs, she choked out, "No. It wasn't like that at all. It was just me embracing something thrilling. It had nothing to do with damaging you or our marriage." "Well, your thrilling experience just ended our marriage," I said, my voice firm. "When you got on that plane, you closed the door on our relationship and our family." She cried harder, pleading, "Our marriage doesn't have to end. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I swear it won't happen again. We can fix this if we love each other enough to make it work." I stood up, shaking my head. I don't see how that's possible right now. Your things are already packed in your car. We need space. You need to go somewhere else for a few days until we figure out what happens next. Honestly, I can't even look at you without remembering everything that occurred. Please just leave. But this is my house too, she sobbed. Yes, it is, I replied, my patience thinning. But if you want any chance of saving this marriage, you need to go for a while. If you stay, I might head straight to a lawyer to file for divorce. I need time to cool off. If you want a divorce, we can start the process, I continued. But right now, I'm giving myself a chance to think. Bobby, I have nowhere to go. I don't want a divorce. I want to stay with you. I promise I'll never do anything like this again. You can go to your friends who encouraged you to get on that plane, I said, my voice steady. Tell them how one impulsive decision led to a lifetime of consequences. It should be interesting for them to hear the story. She shook her head, defeated. Okay, I'll do that. But please remember I care about you, Bobby. That's a strange way to show your care, I replied, feeling a wave of anger wash over me. I see what you've done, and all I hear from you are lies. Wiping her eyes, she asked, can I call you tomorrow? Sure, I said, though I didn't promise to pick up if I didn't want to. The following week unfolded like that day. Shelley kept saying she loved me and wanted to come back, but I told her I was struggling to let her back into my life. That evening, I began to plan my next steps to set things right. It took me 3 evenings to finalize my thoughts. I texted Shelley and asked if she wanted to have dinner and talk about everything, except our problems. She happily agreed, though the atmosphere felt strained. Each thing we said was scrutinized by the other, as if we were both searching for hidden meanings. She wanted to come back to our house, but I made it clear that wasn't going to happen. We parked near her friend's place, and I said, there are some important things we need to discuss. She looked at me, searching for good news or bad. Shelley, no matter what happens with us, you should get checked for health issues. It's for your well-being and for the boys too. That won't be necessary, she replied, her tone dismissive. Both men were good people. I can't trust our son's health to your word, I insisted. If you don't get tested, I will have to take steps to keep you away from them. Shelley viewed this as caring for our boys, not as an accusation against her, which was part of my plan. Since you've been less than truthful with me about your trip, I want to see the test results. You'll need to work hard to earn my trust again. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, I get it, she replied, her voice quiet. If things were different, I would act the same way.